You're listening to the VORTX Podcast, featuring interviews with your favorite artists. Here's your host, Ethan Jackson.
Hey, it's Ethan here today with a different kind of artist. Normally we hang out with musical artists, but today we've got Adam Savage on the show. How are you?
I'm very good, sir. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. It's great to see you. You always seem to be in a very, I don't want to say you're always excited, but you're always happy. And so it's always nice to see you, whether it's on YouTube with Tested or, however. So
I come from a long line of optimists. And I live a couple blocks from here. I spend every day in this beautiful space. I'm living the dream. This shop is my safe space.
That's awesome. So you do, other than, working on all of your projects, you have Tested, the YouTube channel where you do, you made some models recently. You did the Dune model. But you also go around the country, visit fans. This weekend is Planet Comicon Kansas City. It's the 25th anniversary. You're back. Why is it exciting and fun for you to go out and get to meet people who've been watching you for years?
Well, the con circuit, and there's hundreds of cons around the United States, from the small, I've been to cons with 150 people, and the large, I've been to cons with 200,000 people, New York or San Diego or Dragon Con. Every single con is different, and it's a different intersection with a different part of your fandom. And, I sign autographs, I take pictures, I do selfies, and over the course of any given weekend, I feel like I get a real insight into that market, that group of makers, that group of creative people that come to tell me their stories. And I had a great time there in Kansas City 2 years ago. I'm really excited they're having me back this year.
Did you ever imagine, when you first started out your career, when you started doing MythBusters, that you would end up traveling the country just to see people, because people were wanting to stop by and say hi and tell you how they grew up watching the show, that kind of thing?
It's been a fascinating progression. No, we really didn't anticipate that. We didn't anticipate the long legs. Jamie, Carrie, Tori Grant, and I we are all freelancers. So we are all built to kind of think, what's next? And not to spend too much time thinking about the parameters of what you're doing, except to execute your job. And so that's what we were doing. The joke we used to say is we never thought of the children. But I think that's why the show resonated. We didn't speak down to our audience.
For sure. One thing that I thought about the other day when we were starting to get this set up is I said to myself, this might be the first interview that I do where my grandparents know who I'm talking to. And because my grandparents, whenever they came over when I was a kid, whether it was Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holiday, Discovery Channel was on. That was what we watched with my grandparents, just kind of hanging out, waiting for things to get going. And it was either a MythBusters marathon or Dirty Jobs and stuff like that. And so that was a funny little thought that I had the other day.
Well, tell your parents that I'm sorry if you burned down the garage.
Well, it's only happened once, so, Well, other than MythBusters, you did some really cool film work as well, back in the late 90s, early 2000s with ILM. And I actually just rewatched Galaxy Quest last night.
Amazing.
I love this film. And I was curious, what work did you do on that movie specifically?
So Galaxy Quest was a long project at ILM. It lasted for a long time because we were part of the early development phase, and then the original director left. A new director came in. We were part of that phase, and I was working on other stuff at the same time. But I was brought into Galaxy Quest specifically to help build part of the Thermian dock where the ship leaves from. And as it's leaving, famously, it scrapes against the side and everyone's trying to be polite. One of my favorite scenes. I built the enlarged section of the space station that they grind against, which was basically, that space station was a set of panels about this big with internal lights and little slides of thermions in the windows being backlit so it looked like people were watching. I simply built one of those that was, I think, 2 or 3x that size. So it was about 3 feet long with bigger thermions in there. So as the camera went by, they showed up in the resolution.
That's awesome. Love that movie. I thought it was funny considering, they start out at the con and all of that, and that's what we're, chatting about. So I had to give that a rewatch last night. Now
It's very meta. It's very meta.
oh, it's great. I think the first time I watched it, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. We were doing a sci-fi class. Oh, it's been longer than that. I graduated 5 or 6 years ago. Anyway, it's been a while. Watched it in school for the first time. Had never seen it before. And it actually, the beginning of it, watching it last night, reminded me of the Santa Claus, the other Tim Allen movie, because he's like trying to tell these people this thing that nobody else believes, and they have to go to this mysterious place and do this thing that nobody's ever going to believe. And it was there's kind of some similar storylines
Yeah.
there. So I thought that was kind of funny. But other films you worked on, what, Star Wars Episode 1, Episode 2, both of those? What was your involvement in those projects?
We did a lot of what you would call set extensions for those movies. Episode 1, I actually got to work on a couple of spaceships, which was spectacular. Episode 1 is the last Star Wars film that they built physical ships for it. Now, that got bumped when Mando started, because my friend John Goodson has been building all the ships for Mandalorian and Skeleton Crew and those shows as well. But the last film to have actual spaceships was Episode 1, so I'm glad I snaked in there. But most of what we did were things like Padme's apartment building. The flyovers of that building, the close-ups of it, were all a practical model that we made at Fawn Davis and I built that at an insanely high level of detail. And so we were part of that lovely marriage that ILM does between practical effects and CG, shooting into practical effects for the extremely high detail and using CG to blend it into the rest of the atmosphere.
When they bring you in to work on, or when they brought you in to work on a project like that, how long would it take before you got to the final model? I'm imagining you're working on this for months and months and months.
Not months and months and months. Usually, somewhere between 3 to 6 or 8 weeks, depending on the gig. I know that, like, for Topoka City, all of those buildings were models in Topoka City. I think there was 5 of them, and we had the murderer's row of model makers at ILM working on those. Dave Fogler, John Goodson, John Duncan, Tori, me, Grant, everyone was working on them. And so I think it was going on for like 5 weeks before I joined, and I joined in the last 2 weeks to make the hero building that Django and Obi-Wan fight in front of. So yeah, somewhere around, somewhere under 2 months in general.
Okay, that's a little quicker than I expected to be, but that's awesome. Now I'm curious, going from ILM to MythBusters, because correct me if I'm wrong, but you left ILM and then went to do the show, right? It wasn't
actually, technically, I was working for Warner Brothers on the Matrix sequels when we shot the pilots for MythBusters. But I managed, and ILM and Warner Brothers both gave me leaves of absence to film the show.
Was that a difficult decision?
No. So first off, I was working on the Matrix sequels. I was one of the model supervisors. And Don Bees, who's a really wonderful friend of mine and the R2-D2 operator for many years, he took over for me while I went and shot the pilots for 6 weeks. No, that was absolutely, like, the pilots came up. That was what to do. I'm a freelancer. Here's an opportunity. We're going to see what we can do with it. We shot the pilots over 6 weeks, and then I went back to work. I worked on. I finished up the Matrix. I started working on Terminator 3. Supervised the building of the particle accelerator set from Terminator 3, and really was just concentrating on that. And then the first show aired in January of 2003 while I was working on Pan, the Peter Pan film. I was working on Hook's ship, the Grimace, and the show aired. Discovery told us that it would take, they were like, be prepared. It might take us a few months before we decide to award a season of the show. I think it took them less than a week. That they said we want to do an entire season. So I worked on Pan up until we started shooting the show.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, one of the most famous tests that you guys did on MythBusters, I believe that the result was plausible, was the Titanic door wood test, whether or not Jack could have actually gotten on the door, and you involved James Cameron, and that was a fun little bit. I'm curious, has there been anything that has happened in a movie since that show that if the show was still going on, you would have liked to tackle like that one?
Oh, it's funny. So it has now been 8 years since we wrapped the show, 8.5 years. And for the longest time, I kept on adding stuff to my list. It's like I watch a movie, I watch a TV show, I see something that's a testable phenomenon. I can't not put it on the list. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I that started to peter out. So I'm back to my suspension of disbelief. I sit through a movie and just enjoy it. I don't have to think about whether or not it requires some testing.
That's funny. Now, a new movie that just came out, we talked about this a minute ago, Dune 2 is out now. You said you haven't seen it,
Yeah.
but you got the now infamous popcorn bucket. You got a couple of them and built this really cool model of it. It's awesome. I tried to get one over the weekend and they were all sold out. No surprise.
Yeah.
But you go into building this model. So you just see the bucket and go, I could do something with that. Where does all of that come from?
That was actually a real collaborative thing. It was Norm told me about the bucket, and then we were traveling. We were flying back from England, and he was like, "We should do a build with that bucket. Let me see if I can find some." He had to call 3 different theaters to find somebody that had one. Actually, he had to visit 3 because no one answers the phone anymore. He brought me the buckets. I started thinking about what I would do with them, and then once I had them, that became much clearer. So that's a group effort. Tested. We're all the geeks that you think we are, and we're all paying attention to the kind of stuff that's going on out there. And, we have regular meetings about the kind of stuff that's keeping us interested.
Absolutely. Now, you said you're going to go to a 1570 IMAX presentation. I'm curious, is that your preferred way to see a movie is IMAX, or do you like the Dolby Cinema, or what do you prefer when you go to the theater?
I dig I saw Dune 1 in Dolby Atmos, and I found that to be a spectacular experience. I really, really, I got to see Blade Runner 2049 in the Dolby Theater down in LA, another spectacular auditory experience. I don't have a specific format I think is better than any other for me. In general, I don't seek out the IMAX. It can be overwhelming, and the rigmarole. It's a case by case basis. Honestly, I'm not precious about it.
That's awesome. Well, I had one question for you from somebody online. I asked folks if they had questions, and I thought that this one was interesting. They said that this was their difficult question. So they said, why did Carrie, Tori, and Grant not continue with MythBusters after you and Jamie decided to end your run?
Oh, that is. I'm not sure that was on offer, but that is. We were all ready to say goodbye to the show when we were filming the last season in 2015. We had done it for 13 years. We made almost 300 hours of television. Every one of us got to experience a sort of king's ransom of unparalleled experiences, things that most people don't ever get to try or to experience. And yeah, by late 2015, we were absolutely delighted to put it to bed. My favorite part about our last season was that Discovery Channel worked with us and allowed us to call it the last season. In reality television, a lot of shows just end. They stop making them. We were on so long, and our relationship with the fans was so mission critical to the success of the show that we really wanted to make that last season a love letter, and we did.
That's awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for hanging out for a little while today. I'll let you get back to whatever it is you're working on in the shop today. I know you were cutting some stuff with that new saw back there. But I'm excited to see you at Planet Comicon in Kansas City this weekend. And if you're coming out to it, make sure to stop by, grab a photo, autograph, and all that good stuff. Thanks so much, Adam.
It's my absolute pleasure. I can't wait to come out and hear some stories on the autograph line. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for listening to the VORTX Podcast. Catch Ethan inside the Vortex every Sunday night from 9 to midnight on Topeka's Rock Leader, V100.